Hi, everyone, and welcome to our Delete, Act, and Drop webinar. I'm Noah, the Senior Product Marketing Manager at Mine, handing over to Ron De Jesus, our Chief Trust Officer and Head of Privacy Strategy at Mine, who will be moderating this webinar. Ron, over to you.
Thanks so much, Noah. Everyone, I'm so excited for today. Again, I'm Ron De Jesus, the Chief Trust Officer and Head of Privacy Strategy at Mine. I've been having a ton of conversations with chief privacy officers, with privacy leaders, folks that are really just, leading programs at their companies, who still are unsure of their data broker status, or haven't even assessed applicability of the Delete Act. And that was kind of the driver for this webinar. Again, these conversations that I've been having out in the field at conferences, CPOs, of F1000 still determining, whether or not they should be looking into their obligations, with the countdown coming up until August 1st, which we'll dive into. So again, that was the driver, the impetus, and I'm really excited to share all the information that we've gleaned in my discussions with Liz Allen from CalPrivacy, who I'm so happy that we have the pleasure of hearing from today, and then also Gal Golan. But I'll pass it over to you, Liz, just to give a quick intro, and then we can get started.
Sure. Well, thanks for having me. My name is Liz Allen. I am the attorney for the Drop, which is the delete, request, and opt-out platform here at CalPrivacy. I've been an attorney here for 4 years, and it's kind of all things Delete Act for a number of years. We now have a team that's getting excited for our second launch, August 1st, which is delete request processing. So I'm excited to be here and to chat with you all.
Amazing, Liz. Thanks for your time. And Gal Golan, feel free.
Hi, everyone. Great to see you again. My name is Gal. I'm Mine's CTO and one of the co-founders, looking over the technical strategy, implementation, and product delivery here at Mine.
Amazing. Well, we're going to learn a ton from you two. And so I'm excited to just dive in, but I'll briefly go over the agenda. So next slide, Noah. We'll start with kind of the key Delete Act timelines and scope. So up until, what we know about August 1st, obviously, but what has happened behind the scenes upon kind of the initiation of the Delete Act. I think understanding at a high level the genesis of these requirements is important. Then we'll dive into definitions, data broker, selling, sharing, direct relationship, all that good stuff that really helps businesses understand whether they're caught by the scope. We'll take a look at how to actually get ready for August 1st. Again, we have about, 31 days till we get there. And so there's enough time to ramp up your strategies. So what do you actually have to do as a data broker once you've committed to the fact that you are one? And then I'll ask Liz to walk us through perhaps some of the things that she's focusing on at CalPrivacy. Then we'll hand it over to Gal, who's going to really dive into the weeds around the operational challenges with respect to drop compliance and strategies that you might be thinking about. So, hashes and suppression lists and all that good stuff around the more operational, practical realities of complying with drop. And then if we have time at the end, I'll look at the question list and see if we have any good questions for both Liz and Gal here. So that's going to be the hour. I'll monitor if there are any comments coming in, but we have a lot to go over. So Liz, if we could just start with basically, from genesis of the Delete Act in October of 2023, now leading up to our August 1st compliance obligations. Can you kind of walk us through it just at a high level, what has happened since then?
Yeah, this law has been written and essentially set up for kind of a slow rollout. So it's got 4 main components. The Delete Act, when it was passed in 2023, essentially you have an annual requirement to register the year after you meet the definition of data broker, you had any data brokering activity. So you have to annually register in the month of January, which includes paying fees and answering some questions, providing some disclosures. You have to post your privacy rights request metrics. So, number of delete requests, number of opt-out requests, some pieces of information on your privacy policy. Again, the year after you meet the definition of data broker, you have to then August 1st, which is the big deadline, which of course we're talking about, process deletion request. And starting in 2028, you'll have the obligation to audit, which we'll talk about a little bit later. So in January 1st, 2024, we took over the registry. There was actually a requirement to register in the state of California. And I think there's, oh Lord, over, I think, 7 states now, I think, that have data broker registries. Can I get passed? Anyway, so you have to register in a bunch of different states. California started that in 2020, I guess. We took it over, CalPrivacy took it over in 2024. And in 2024, you had to start posting your public disclosures. This year, during January 1st, 2026, we opened essentially for consumers. So consumers can give us a small amount of personal information, and we will essentially batch and create multiple lists with those identifiers that consumers give us, things like phone number, email, date of birth, some pseudonymous identifiers like mobile ad ID. We create different lists for those different identifiers, and data brokers can come and pick up those lists and start processing those requests starting August 1st. To date, we have over 300,000 California consumers that have submitted a deletion request through Drop, and that number is only increasing. Once we hit the August 1st deadline, there is an ongoing obligation to essentially access the system at least every 45 days. You can access it more than that, to pull down the ongoing deletion requests. So for example, there's 300,000 folks now. Maybe, by the time 45 days have gone by, maybe 10,000 more folks will have put in their information. You have the obligation, you'll get those new requests and process those within 45 days. And then starting 2028, you have an obligation to hire and conduct an independent third-party audit every 3 years. So that's where we are, kind of 30 days before that August 1st deadline.
Yeah, 300,000 consumers operationalizing and actually being cognizant of their privacy rights is actually really impressive. I know Tom has gone on quite the roadshow, making sure that consumers understand. Yeah, it's been great. And so kind of the messaging that I got was lots of things have been happening in the background. We talk about August 1st as like this kind of key data broker date. But again, to your point, Jan 1st, as a consumer in California, I have the ability to basically start and engage in the process of Drop. And I think one of the important things on this slide to emphasize again is it's not a deadline per se. It's a deadline essentially to start an activity that, to your point, Liz, is essentially going to happen in perpetuity, right?
Yes. This law was modeled after the Do Not Call registry, which of course was the Florida law that then moved up to be a federal law. So, and the Do Not Call registry, you put your phone number on it once, and that request is ongoing. And so that's what this law was modeled after. So these are ongoing requests.
Nice. And there were also flourishes of things that we've already been doing per the CCPA, for example, like we were, I think in, disclosure of number of opt-out requests, for example. So we should essentially have some of that infrastructure to respond to some of these data broker transparency obligations as well, I think. So
yeah, I mean, delete requests are not new. They're not new in California, not
exactly.
new in the 20 plus states that have that obligation. So they're, this is a type of delete request, but of course the definitions from the Delete Act, if any of, those terms are defined in the CCPA. So what does it mean to delete? All of that comes from the CCPA and it's imported into the Delete Act. So this is not a novel right. This is just an operationalization of a right.
Yeah, and really great segue into our next section, Liz, which is kind of talking through those definitions, right? So we've been thinking about it in this first question around, am I a data broker? But I think, if you can go to the next slide, I think the right question is, what are the activities that might lend yourself to be considered a data broker versus trying to define, data broker per se. So Liz, I'd love for you to kind of just go over what those key definitions are that might lend yourself to at least consider yourself to be a data broker. And I know you had just mentioned a lot of these definitions kind of originate from existing California regulations. So can we dive into that a little bit?
Yeah, of course. So the definition in the Delete Act is a business that knowingly collects and sells to third parties the personal information of a consumer with whom the business does not have a direct relationship. So of course, the lawyers in the room are thinking, okay, what does it mean to collect? What does it mean to sell? And that is a threshold. So if you're keeping data in-house and you are not selling it, then you're not a data broker, although the colloquial, common definition of sell is probably more narrow than what the law allows for. So the definition of sell in the CCPA is much wider. And then, of course, a lot of this turns on the definition of direct relationship. So if you think about collect, which again is fairly wide, it's buying, renting, gathering, obtaining, all of that, of course, that definition comes from the CCPA, it's imported in. And then sell, and the definition of sell is, also, again, very wide. So things like releasing, disclosing, disseminating. It doesn't have to be for money. It could be for other valuable consideration, which is just a term of like providing value. So if you're trading a list, for example, there's no money involved, but that still would be considered a sell under the CCPA. So understanding that those are wide terms is a really important place to start. Personal information, again, in the CCPA, there are some exemptions to this. So, for example, publicly available information is not considered personal information. There are some exemptions for certain types of data under the Delete Act. So if you have some data that is governed under a different privacy law, for example, GLBA, HIPAA, these are like, health laws or finance laws or insurance law, that data is also exempt. And then, of course, the back half of this definition does a lot of work. This is you have to collect and sell the information of a consumer with whom the business does not have a direct relationship. And a direct relationship is defined in the regulations. There's essentially 3 different parts to the definition. Perhaps the most important part where I think people get kind of confused a little bit is the third sentence, which is a business is still a data broker and does not have a direct relationship with a consumer as to personal information it sells about the consumer that it collected outside of the first party interaction. So essentially, to give an example of this, if you have a direct relationship, so you sell shoes, consumer comes, they buy shoes from you, the consumer has given you credit card data, an address, their name, their shoe size that they like, really hot kicks, like all of that is information you have, that's first party data. If you are a company that is buying other pieces of information and appending or amending or enriching that data so that you now know that person, loves cats and, lives in a major metro, et cetera, you have kind of enriched this original first party data set. And then you are selling that, right? Because you have to sell it. That would make you a data broker. And under the Delete Act, if a consumer puts in a request, you have to delete the third party data. The fact that this person likes cats and they live in a major metro, the enriched part of the data set. The first party data is always yours. That is governed under the CCPA. The Delete Act is trying to get to this enriched, the kind of like a third party set that you have both bought and are selling out to other folks.
Yeah.
So let me know, what do you got?
There's a lot to unpack there. So I wanted to first state that what I think a lot of my peers are tripping up on, firstly, is they're hearing the word data broker, and what they're envisioning in their head is that typical, the Equifax or that kind of large conglomerate that is actually in the business of selling. And then they're kind of like scoping themselves immediately and saying, we're not really there. So I really, really love that you emphasize the enrichment piece, because that's where I think a lot of my peers, CPOs are starting to have that light bulb moment of, my marketing teams are buying lists and they are appending their information. The selling and sharing piece might still be something that folks aren't necessarily doing outright. But I think, again, it's still coming to terms with the fact that you might be doing activities that lend yourself to be a data broker, right? So it's getting out of that mindset of data broker as the definition and instead going to activities, right? Because I think, again, that whole an example was so pertinent to a lot of the people. Like I come from retail, right? So we are appending and enriching our data. So really important. Yeah. for sure.
Yeah, I would say there's kind of like that group of folks. And then there's a whole group of folks who are like, well, I'm just a service provider and like I don't fall into this definition at all. And for those folks, I would say like, I would be careful. Like, what does your contract say? What is your data flow doing? What is your marketing team doing? Even though you're a service provider, like there is still a world where if you are on the hook for the list, if the list doesn't get delivered, who does that fall to? Is that liability on you? Is it on the person who you are saying is the business you're acting on behalf of? You've got to make sure that your contracts are clean. If you're going to claim you're a service provider under this law and not in fact a business, then you better make sure that things are ticking and tying, your data flows make sense, your contract makes sense, your liability makes sense, and that your marketing team is not off doing something you don't know about. So those are some
1000%.
things I would say.
And actually, no, if we can go to the next slide, a lot of these things Liz is saying is covered in terms of like these common misconceptions, if you will. So a lot of the times I think a majority of businesses actually do a number of these things. So collecting personal information from sources beyond direct consumers, making consumer data available to third parties or to partners, enriching, we already talked about. So again, we might be doing these things that are data broker-ish per se, but not kind of fulfilling the direct relationship plus selling. But I think it's still a good start to first assess these data processing activities anyway. And then Liz, if you can think on the right-hand side, we've talked about kind of the activities and focusing on the activities. Is this a kind of a good start, like just doing an inventory of how it's collected, identifying direct relationship? What other kind of guidance can you give companies that might still be in the moment, I'm still thinking about it kind of?
Yeah, I would also mention the second sentence in the definition of direct relationship. It says essentially like if you are a cookie provider, et cetera, if a consumer is interacting with a cookie, a pixel, a tag, like some sort of third-party tracking, that is not considered a direct relationship. So you are inherently indirect if that's what you are relying on. So a consumer that's interacting with that, I mean, consumers don't know those exists for the most part, let alone that they are providing information through these, third-party, trackers that are firing. So, that is something that we've directly carved out. That is to just explicitly state that for the record that those are not direct relationships. So if you are in that world, I know ad tech is its own beast. All of us in the CCPA worked for firms or for companies, or most of us did before we went in-house. So we do know how complicated the data flows can be. But I really would say like the data flow and the contracts are the two things you got to pay attention to. And then like what's firing on your page? Like what are you selling when you don't even know you're selling it? This is like, this is a big piece, of whether you fall under this category of business that has that would fall under the definition of data broker.
Yeah. And again, great segue into the next slide, which is, again, we commonly think of the DELETE Act as data enrichment providers, location data providers, so providers of data that are, again, in this kind of first stance of providing companies with information and selling them information. What we often overlook are some of these other, analytics and measurement providers, audience segmentation services, data licensing. And I think that also a company, you can be 95% entirely like SaaS or retailer or, traditional B2C. But again, if 5% of what you're doing might lend itself to be data brokerish, if you will, I'll TM that term, Liz, but that could bring you under the scope, right? And that again, I think that's what's tripping a lot of professionals in the space is that they don't realize what their marketing teams might be doing with that 5%. So again, I think it's incredibly important to kind of first principles start with an inventory, talk to the people that you've already built relationships with as part of your day-to-day privacy operations, and really get a sense of that sense of activity that we keep emphasizing. So
and I think just like give one other example here, we've been hearing from folks who are like, okay, like I have like these various lists and like, so maybe all told I have 1,000 pieces of data on an individual, but like, some of it's publicly available information, which is not considered a PI. So you get to hold on to it. Like some
Right.
of it is exempt under GLBA, so I get to hold on to that under that exemption. And so you really have to map, like, you know, what is considered, what is going to fall under this and what is not. And so for some folks, it's like these lists, I'm actually, you know, we've heard people be like, I'm just not going to deal with these anymore because it's like too much of a pain. And I'm going to, you know, move over here, do this, or I'm going to shut down this, like, you know, tiny bit of business we're doing over here because it's just, it doesn't make sense to try to have to like then comply with all of this. And so I think like that is like the first place to start, is kind of like doing the data inventory, the mapping, et cetera. So, and just to make, you know, and to make sure, you know, if this data is all exempt under HIPAA, then it's exempt, you know, and that's then you're exempt. Like that is, you know, that's okay. It's okay to like come to that conclusion. But I would say that we know that most of the time, most people who are moving around in this space are enriching, are creating inferences. Remember, an inference about somebody is personal information. So you got to be very careful.
Absolutely. And it's funny that you mentioned that sometimes the strategy that companies take is we're just going to stop doing it because it's too much to comply with. And we saw a lot of that happen with GDPR, for example, where a lot of businesses were like, they made the active decision to kind of pull out of these jurisdictions. But from my perspective, that's not really a sustainable strategy, because these things are going to be popping up all the time. And, you know, California is the first in terms of having this really incredible groundbreaking drop, but who's to say the next state won't, right? So
well, we already have another state on the book. So Connecticut has passed a data broker, a delete act. It's very similar to California's, and they have a drop mechanism. Vermont got very close this year. They passed a version of a delete act and a comprehensive privacy bill. Law, not a bill anymore. And we've talked to other states. You know, the CalPrivacy does a lot of part of our CCPA mandate is to provide technical assistance and work and trying to harmonize with other states and other countries. And we get a lot of inbound from other states and from other countries. So I don't think we are going to be the first and only out here in California. We often try things first. We had the first comprehensive privacy law in the states. We're the first ones to have a delete act. But I can tell you that people are paying attention. Connecticut has already passed it, and those are not the only conversations we are having.
Yeah, we always hope as privacy operations folks that if we comply with California that we're good. But I think we've seen
pretty close.
We can get close. Yeah.
But I have to say our 2018, you know, CCPA is from 2018. And so some of these most recent, you know, these are like bills that have learned from all the mistakes from CCPA and all the implementation challenges. And so like the Maryland bill is very different. And, you know, you can't, anyway, CCPA is now kind of old, like a little bit older. So
I mean,
interesting to watch.
Last example, like Minnesota requires, you know, has institutionalized, for example, DPIAs, right? And I know that we're already doing that. But again, these nuances per state law are definitely, I think, we're going to see when it comes to data brokers as well, and delete act type requirements. No, next slide, please. But I think this is a really interesting slide to the risks of misclassification. So again, Liz, I've determined that I'm a data broker. Talk me through some of the things that might be, you know, impactful to me if I, again, might have determined my status, but haven't done the operational controls or implemented them to actually comply with drop. Walk me through that a little bit.
Yeah. First, I would say if you are somebody who is like, you know, what's that go? Like the next best time to do something is now. So if you should have registered, like hop on over, like go to drop, you know, so you can go to privacy.ca.gov/data-brokers or privacy.ca.gov, like create an account, get yourself registered. If you were a data broker last year, pay your registration fee or your access fee and get moving. I will say that you know, we've brought about a dozen settlements and investigations for registration only, which is $200 per day. So, you know, these fees or fines are low, kind of generally speaking.
Mm-hmm.
California that have signed up thus far, actually over. And so you are looking at a single day of failing to do this is $60 million fine. So
when I heard that, Liz, on your webinar, I was like, my jaw was to the floor.
This will be the biggest fine. This will be the biggest fines, the biggest settlements that have ever come out of the United States. And so, and the agency has waved as many flags as it can to say this is a priority. You know, our executive director helped shepherd this bill through. We have a data broker strike force that we announced in enforcement. Enforcement is hiring, if you've seen our posts, which means we're staffing up. And there's been enforcement advisories. There have been these other settlements about registration, meaning the agency is taking this as seriously as, it's indicating that it is taking it seriously. I work on the product side. My job is to help you comply. Enforcement is to try to find the folks who are not complying and make it more painful and more costly for the whole industry, right? We're trying to drive behavior globally. And so, these are not small. This is not a $70,000 fine. This is $60 million for a single day. So it's not August 1st yet. These compliance obligations haven't kicked in, but the first thing I would do is get your ducks in a row. And so create an account, register, and then you have to kind of go through this whole flow to kind of get set up to ingest the requests, process those requests, and then you have to report status back to us on each individual identifier. And then you have to maintain these consumer requests as ongoing, as deleted, maintain these folks as deleted ongoing. So this ends up being quite a few steps to kind of operationalize, which I know Gal will get into.
You give us a good sneak peek into that, Liz, though. But I think generally speaking, high level next steps for folks on the call that haven't started is conduct a data flow audit. I mean, that's key. How's your personal information collected, used, and shared? You should have this done. I'm sorry, but if you don't know where your data lives now, you're kind of behind the game already. So get that data audit and systems audit done. And I mean, we're saying here, engage Privacy Counsel. Obviously, from a legal perspective, getting an opinion on whether or not you might be a data broker is a good thing. But again, understanding this from a high level, as we've gone through from an activities-based perspective, is a good start. And then, when uncertain, err on the side of registering. And then I think CalPrivacy, Liz, has indicated that's actually kind of like a safer bet, right? Just when you're uncertain, right?
I mean, I think counsel is good if you're uncertain. Unfortunately, we can't give legal advice as the agency, and this stuff is really complicated. But part of the importance of mapping your data is that counsel is going to ask you all these questions anyway. So you have to have the answer to them, so they can't, they're not going to be able to give you the right advice unless they understand your data flow themselves. So I would definitely start there. But this is a very expensive mistake to make, or possibly could be a very expensive mistake to make. So it's probably worth making sure that is not you are not the one in charge of making that mistake.
100%. I always relied on outside counsel just to make sure. So no, slide 10 again, just some really quick questions on kind of helping you decide that piece. Do we collect personal information from other sources? Do we make it available to third parties? I won't go through all this, but again, it's a good checklist of sorts, and we'll have this available as part of the recording as well. I wanted to jump into, Liz, kind of again, we've come to August 1st. What do we do on August 1st? And then also maybe get some enforcement outlook insights from you if possible, but I'll save that till we get there. But in terms of, again, I'm a data broker and I've decided to register for Drop. Walk me through that kind of process.
So we talked about registration and account creation. So Drop is its own essentially CRM. It's a double-sided platform that we've built over the last couple of years. There's a data broker side, there's a consumer side. We are in the middle. You give us a small amount of, you log in, you create an account, you give us a small amount of information, your account gets approved. If you're registering, you have a registration form to make your way through. You are either paying an access fee if you are starting data brokering this year. If you were a data broker last year, you need to pay the registration fee. And then you essentially are starting to, very soon you'll be able to choose your list. So consumers give us a certain amount of information. There's like, they don't have to give us all pieces of information. The more common identifiers, there are more of them. So for example, they can give up to 3, they can give more than 1 email address. I think it's at 3 right now. So the email list is longer than 300,000. And so you essentially choose what identifiers you have in your own system. So you could choose the email list, you can choose the phone number list. There's a combined list, name, date, zip, where those 3 are combined. There's connected TV ID and name, made and VIN, or VIN and name. Am I messing those up? Okay, and there's 6 lists. You have to figure out which ones you need. If you collect both, if you have emails and some of your records have phones and then maybe they don't overlap, then you have to pull both of those lists down. CalPrivacy keeps nothing in plain text. So consumers give us information. We hash it immediately, SHA-256. We use a SHA-256 hash. Nothing is stored in plain text in our database at all. Nothing is passed to data brokers in plain text. We're not, this is not we're not trying to be a honeypot. We know that do not call registry can kind of be. So part of our architecture here is making sure we're not passing a whole profile to data brokers so that they get more information about consumers than they had before. The obligation is to pull. The lists are scrambled. So for example, if the first person has 1 email, 1 phone, a name, a date, and zip, those are not all on the same line so that you can't actually put folks back together. And so every hash you get also has an ID next to it, and your job after you have standardized your own data. So there's a bunch of steps on standardization. We're very specific on how to standardize the identifier. So phone numbers, no dashes, no parentheses, and then you hash. You have to standardize first, and then you hash, and then you match. And that's kind of a whole flow. I think Gal will go through that in a little bit more specificity. Then you match, and if our hash matches your hash, then you are checking your whole list that you have on that identifier, so all 1,000 pieces of data, to see what needs to be deleted. Now, these are delete requests, so the obligation is to delete. However, if you have a phone number, for example, that matches to several different folks, say it's a family line or something, and you can't match it with specificity, then you're going to opt all those folks out of sale or sharing. You don't have to actually delete them, but you do have to opt them out. Then, so you have to then, for every identifier, report back a status, and a status is either deleted, opted out, exempt. So like, everything we have on this person is exempt under GLBA or whatever, or it's under a litigation hold, also a possibility, or not found, couldn't find the person, so maybe you'll get 350,000 emails and you found some percentage of them, but a whole bunch you didn't find. That's fine. That's expected. You would return not found. In the back end, once you report up all those identifiers, CalPrivacy in the back end has an algorithm that essentially takes the identifiers for each person. And there's a term, if you've deleted anything out, that's what you report back. And so for us, that's also what we service to the consumer. So, there's some consumer education here about, that we are doing. That's like, publicly available information is exempt. So like, if you own property, people can find out that you own property. That's, part of the way America works. And so, then you have to maintain as deleted. And so you have to essentially make sure that those deletion requests maintain as deleted, whether you found them or not. So all 300,000 folks, you need to make sure and screen any list you have coming in, or find them and delete them if they are inside your system already. And then you're just repeating that ongoing. It's like an ongoing requirement every 45 days to pull down the new requests to action. And the idea of maintaining as deleted, that is the work of every time you are ingesting some new data.
So if you're a data broker, this is your life from August 1st onwards. This is your life. Yeah. And I, if we can go to the next slide. No, that was great, Liz. This is just like another view into what you had just mentioned in terms of that life cycle. So consumers submitting the requests, what organizations should be doing. And so I won't go into too much detail because you've gone kind of over that life cycle, Liz, but I think the ones that I kind of wanted to emphasize here was, this is, again, a 45-day process that is in perpetuity. And again, as the technology advances, it's something that could be obviously automated at scale. And I think we'll talk about that a little bit when Gal gets into the kind of the technical challenges that he's seeing as well. But no, next slide, please, on 14. Last piece for you here, Liz, just in terms of from a legal perspective, would you be able to give us some sort of maybe enforcement insight or sneak peek into what CalPrivacy might be looking into, at least, or anything like that?
Yeah, I wish. Unfortunately, we don't talk about that, and I'm not on the enforcement team, so I can't. But I will say that, you know, the compliance window obligation, you know, starts August 1st. You do have 45 days from August 1st to download your first list. Your clock starts when you download, so you have attention until September 14th to pull your first list down, and then you have 45 days to write back your status for the first time. I would give yourself a little wiggle room. I mean, this is not legal advice, but you know, the first batch will be most likely bigger than, you know, next batches. So this has been since January 1st. These are all the consumers that have come in over the last 6 months. You know, you could set up there's an API option, there's a manual option. So if you're setting up some sort of API, and we do have webhooks, so you can set up some sort of automated cron job, for example, and that you can run that however frequently you would like to. Remember that compliance is still ultimately your responsibility. So you want to make sure you've got someone checking for failure points on all of this. Because again, the failure is high. The failure scenario is high here. Possibly costly, possibly very costly.
So such hopeful information.
Yes.
But that was great. I'll give you a minute to catch your breath, but that was such practical information. And as a chief privacy officer, you know, who has previously worked with engineers and product, I'm really excited to have Gal kind of now walk us through some of the operational challenges that he's seen. Again, it's one thing to hear Liz's breakdown of what happens on August 1st and what we're supposed to do in terms of getting our lists and making sure that we're up to date. But Gal, I'd love to have you walk us through kind of the critical things that you're seeing that companies should be considering when it comes to the operational pieces. So Noah, if you want to just skip on down to slide 16, I think we could start.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Ron. So I think the first thing you should obviously do is make sure you understand the requirements, and we've gathered the most important ones here. I'll touch a few of them, especially the ones that people often have confusion around. So Liz already touched the identifiers list selection. So when you sign up, you select the lists that are relevant for the data you are collecting. And then there's the hashing thing, which is very confusing to everyone. So let's maybe spend a minute on that. Identifiers, when they are pulled from drop, they are hashed, meaning they're not plain text, they cannot be reversed, at least not easily, so they are anonymous. That's obviously because of a privacy concern. Drop do not want to be broadcasting identifiers to brokers. So when you get the lists, they are hashed. You need to understand how hashing works, because you will need to implement hashing on your side as well, and we will touch that in a second. You also have the obligation of reporting back to Drop with the 4 different status or responses that Liz has explained. And in terms of pulling the requests, I'll just say that you do have to pull the requests at least every 45 days. So the way this works is you pull the list of hashed identifiers, you process all of them, and we will touch how we can do that in a second. Once you finish processing the identifiers, you report back to Drop. And once you have reported on all the identifiers on one batch, you can pull the next one. And you have to make sure you complete the entire workflow for every batch within 45 days. So it's up to you if you pull every 45 days or every days. The best answer is probably somewhere between. And also the second part that's often confusing is the suppression list. So once an identifier was deleted, it has to be kept deleted, meaning let's say you enrich next month some new data. you have to make sure that that individual's data is not enriched and finds its way back to your systems. So to do that, you have to maintain a suppression list, which is ever growing with identifiers. So think about it this way. Every identifier that you pull from drop, not only that you need to process it in your systems, you also have to log it in a suppression list. So every time you ingest new data, you have to look up the suppression list and exclude any data that's already there. And there was one question here in the audience about concerns about maintaining PII in the suppression list. So good news, the suppression list is hashed because, again, from drop, you don't get identifiers, you get hashed identifiers. And if you don't find them in your systems, even if you don't find them in your own systems, you have to store them in a suppression list. So the suppression list is also hashed identifiers. It does not contain PII, so there's no concern there. The last part
Can I jump in? Can I jump in real quick? So the regulations actually allow you to use something other than the hash identifiers that we supply if you want to, if that works best for your flow. So if you're like, everyone, I key off of email, everyone's got an email, like I want to pull your email list, that's all I need. So you pull the email list, you get our hashed email list, you're comparing, but actually you do all your work with like, live ramp ID or something. So you've got this ramp ID and that's actually what you want to use as your suppression list. You can just use ramp ID if that's like the live ramp ID, if that's what will work better for your flow. It doesn't have to actually be our hashed list, but you have to keep the list growing. So if it's 300,000 today and the next time you pull it's 300,005, then it grows to 300,005 and then it grows to 310,000. So it does have to continue to grow, but it doesn't actually have to be our hashed emails. However, if you have, let's say out of your 300,000, 200,000 are not found, you do have to maintain the IDs because if you then find that person, if you've ingested them into your database and you then find them, you then have to amend that ID from not found to deleted. Just to clarify, if you screen them, if they never make it in, they're not a part of they're not internal into your system, so you're not deleting because they were never in your system, so then you don't have to do this amend flow. But if, for example, somebody makes it into your system and you're deleting them out, you actually do have to amend that status to CalPrivacy.
And maybe last is the audit log obligation. So again, any actions that you do here, you do have to log them in an audit log. For Liz, what's your recommendation in terms of the duration of that audit log?
Yeah, so I would say at minimum 6 years because that is the enforcement. So we have 6 years of data or 6-year enforcement window. So minimum 6 years. So yeah, I'm not going to give you legal advice. I'll just say at minimum 6 years.
Okay, great. Okay, so let's move to the next slide and break down the hashing requirements. So again, just in a nutshell, to serve as a segue for your conversations with technical people, because you do need to engage with them to complete this project. Again, the challenge here, or one of the main challenges around hashing, is that drop uses hashed identifiers, and that's a good thing. But with your own systems, internal systems like databases or even SaaS applications you're using, 99% of them do not use hashes, and if they do, it's probably a different hash. So they work by IDs. If you look up data in a database, it's usually by an identifier that you already use. SaaS applications, they also use identifiers. So we need to find a way to bridge that gap between hashes coming in from drop and identifiers that we are used to work with our day-to-day systems. The way to do that, if we move to the next slide, is obviously we cannot change how our third-party applications work. So we have to find a solution in-house, and our databases is probably the strongest candidate. We have to add data to our databases that will allow us to query them by hashes and not just IDs. And the way to do that is adding hashed columns to the database. So you need to engage with your technical teams, make sure they understand how the hashing algorithm works so they can add these capabilities to your database, and that can be used to bridge also SaaS applications. So imagine a hashed identifier comes in from drop, you search the databases, you find the data, you find all the other IDs that are related to this hash. It's kind of a translation layer, and you use that to extend the search and the lookup to your third-party SaaS applications. So that's like a very high-level approach into solving this challenge. And then next, the next challenge is just building an operational workflow that meets all the requirements from drop, and it's also robust enough to trust with your compliance program. So again, this is kind of an extension to a DSR workflow. So a lot of this will sound familiar if you already have solved DSR challenges in the past. So you've probably went through identifying systems that hold customer data. Here, it's important to understand what type of data is in scope and what is not. You have to decide the exact action to be taken for each system, for each write. Like, what does deletion mean in the marketing platform? What does deletion mean in a database? What's the technical operation that actually happens? And your technical teams can help you with that. Of course, you will need to implement required automations because while this can be handled manually, the numbers already seem quite large. So I would invest in automation. You have to maintain an audit log, and you have to be able to demonstrate compliance and make sure to meet within SLA. It's your obligation to meet the SLA. So I would invest in some sort of tracking or monitoring capabilities to make sure that we are within SLA. So these are standard DSR challenges. Now let's extend them to the drop workflow challenges. So the key challenges or the key considerations for building a robust drop workflow is one is that translation layer from hashes to IDs. We touched that. Next is we need to understand that drop operations, also the API, are file-based, which means everything happens in a batch, which makes sense. We are talking about very large quantities of identifiers. So you pull in the batch, you handle it, and then you move on to the next batch. Third, you have to plan for high volume. And this is where it's not like your typical DSR workflow. Already Liz disclosed some of the numbers we should be expecting. So those are numbers that most companies are not used to handling. Good news is you do have 45 days to handle each of those identifiers. So that's plenty of time if you come prepared. Also, when handling these large amounts of identifier, you should plan for mostly mismatches. So from all the identifiers you pull, you should expect most of them to not match the data you already store. So that's just in terms of optimizing the workflow. And then I will skip, again, the suppression list. It's a big one that many people miss. It's an ever-growing list that you need to maintain, and that should also be incorporated in your data ingestion workflows. So there are other workflows in the company you would probably need to modify, not just your DSR workflow. So that's an important piece to understand. And then maybe to wrap things up, I have, if we can move to the next slide. I've prepared a few tips and best practices. So what should you do next? Let's go one slide back, please. Noah, can you go one slide back, please? Yeah, okay. So what should you do next? You should...
There's a lag in the slides, Gal.
Yeah, okay.
There you go.
Okay. So you should definitely speak with your technical teams as soon as possible. Communicate the full extent of this obligation. It's more challenging than it first seems with all the consideration we just shared. Make sure they understand the suppression lists, the hashing, the data in scope, the audit log requirement, and obviously the timeline of the project. Make sure they are familiar with the technical details. We've touched most of them, but there's still a lot of things you need to uncover when applying that to your own specific systems. And good news, if you have an existing DSR workflow, you already have a great head start. And now I've prepared to wrap things up, a few reference slides. We want to go through these, but these are great reference. You can take a screenshot, you can save that, use that when reaching out to your technical teams. So this is like a high-level breakdown of how a typical workflow could look like. This is our suggestion of how you would implement things with all the different edge cases and steps involved in the workflow. So that can be a great starting point for a discussion with your technical team. Next, we also have a slide that breaks down the specifics of the 6 identifiers lists and what they contain and how the hashing works. So you would see that single identifiers lists are hashed alone. So email is just hashed, and all the combined lists. So for example, name, date of birth, and zip is concatenated hash. So you would need to normalize everything and hash it together. If we skip to the next slide, we can see a more detailed reference, again, just showing it for a few seconds on the screen if you want to grab a screenshot. This is a full breakdown of how hashing works, normalization and hashing for each of the identifiers and the lists, including examples. So just an easy way to get started, and some documentation, where to find the API documentation and like high-level information. So these would be like starting points for technical discussions with your teams.
That's so great, Gal. And just for the folks that are on the webinar, we'll have this in the recording. So all this good documentation that you can share with your teams will be there. Gal, I love how you said that, it's good that we have 45 days to do all this, but as a CPO, I'm not spending 45 days on drop. I'm doing my DPIAs. I am doing my ROPAs. I'm doing the day-to-day operations. So it actually, this is a really helpful walkthrough, because the key takeaway for me as an operational compliance professional was to, yes, start engaging your technical teams. And Liz, during prep, one of the things I had mentioned was I'm really surprised that a lot more folks haven't been yelling that the sky is falling, because literally it is if you haven't started, right? Like
this is a big project.
Yeah.
It's a big project. It's a big project. You're going to need your product team. Yeah. And so generally, I mean, some folks are actually much more prepared, because they've got big DSR flows and they're slotting this into a 100%. Existing robust DSR flow. But if you're not used to this sort of volume, then this is not a simple lift. Can I clarify a couple other things,
sure.
Ron? Okay.
100%.
So real quick, just want to clarify that here in the law, the consumer is a California resident. California resident is based off of it's based off of the tax code in California, and California loves to tax people. So if you are someone who's like, we'll geofence, or we'll use geolocation, that is like not the answer, because you could be someone in the military in Germany and still be paying California taxes. You could be a college kid in New York City and still be paying California taxes. So that is the basis of consumer. It is not somebody who, has an address, a physical mailing address in California. I also want to point out that one of the things we haven't talked about, but that is in the law, is that you must pass all of these deletion requests to your service providers and your contractors. So there is an obligation for a downstream push of the full list. Now, we pass you diffs. So we pass you just the difference from the first, your last pull and the next pull. So we're not giving you 300,000, then 300,005, and then 400,000. Like, the list will be 300,000 and then 5,000 and then 10,000. You're going to get just the differences in between. So, but you do have to then pass those down, which is a workflow that hopefully exists already in your system. But if not, you need to build that as well. And then I just want to say that out loud, because we've said this a bunch of times, is that we do know there are, like, this is the MVP, folks. Like, we have been working our butts off to hit our statutory deadline here. And this is our first push of this product. It's never been built before. It's never been done before. We are learning with you. So, and we can change the identifiers that we collect from consumers if we're finding that what we are collecting now is not yielding the result that the legislature wants, which is that people can delete their information from, people who are selling their information without the consumer, essentially without the consumer directing that sale. So, we know that some people right now might have no match at all. Like we know address brokers, for example, who only have addresses and they don't have name and they don't have date of birth. And like they maybe only have zip, and they're going to pull that name, date, zip list. That's the only one they have. And they're going to return 100% no match. And we know that's going to happen. And we do expect that in some cases. And over time, we hope to get to more of the pseudonymous identifiers. We do know that Made is one of many. As you can imagine, some lists are much shorter than others. So the more common the identifier, the longer the list. The less common the identifier, if your grandma hasn't heard of it, you can imagine those lists are fairly short. So just a few more things that I wanted to make sure I said.
Super quick question, Liz.
Yes.
CalPrivacy has been incredibly, I think, open. As you had mentioned, obviously it's an MVP, but I know you've been incredibly open to companies that are reaching out. How do we actually reach out to you if we have a question, a technical challenge? What are some venues that we can use?
Yeah. So I would definitely go to privacy.ca.gov/data-brokers, and privacy.ca.gov, if you get to the data broker section, has all this API documentation. It's very detailed. It's on there. We have kind of an overview of processing deletion requests, kind of going through the higher level of the steps. You can contact us through there. You can contact us through your Drop account. You can email us at databrokers at our old name, cppa.ca.gov, because our full name is the California Privacy Protection Agency. And we have been trying to answer folks as quickly as possible. And we are very open to feedback, especially at this point as folks are building and starting to get in the weeds. And, we are doing updating our tech docs too. So there's like different version control. There's, different versions. Make sure you're working off the most recent version. There is an email going out this week that will point to our most recent webinar, our PowerPoint, our updated tech docs, kind of goes into webhooks a little bit. So that stay tuned for that. That should be coming out this week, although, hopefully it goes out this week.
We'll be on the lookout, Liz.
Yeah. So that's some ways to get a hold of us.
Nice. Amazing. Before we get into questions, I think we have time for one. I just wanted to let the folks know we're doing a deeper dive into the more technical pieces, specifically how we at Mine are thinking through this. So if you would like to walk through that with Gal and other folks, please join us on July 14th. We'll have a live product demo of what we're doing to address drop. But I do want to get to one question real quick. And I think it's for actually maybe you or Liz, Gal, could respond to this. So if a hash comes in and doesn't correspond to any record we hold, do we still need to log and retain that submission? So I think there's like some, not confusion, but maybe emphasis on the fact that, yes, we do need to keep in perpetuity checking these identifiers, right?
From a technical side,
Yep.
you do need to maintain something that will ensure that this individual's data will not be collected or ingested in the future. Storing the hash is one way to do that. Depending on how your system works, that may or may not be enough. But yes, you do need to maintain identifiers or hashes or both, also for mismatches, just so you can keep them opted out or deleted in the future continuously.
Okay.
And one last thing I want to mention before everyone bounces is that we are working right now. I'm working very hard on the audit regulations, which will be coming out. So there is this 2028 obligation to audit, meaning like you cannot just do this and keep no record. And so we are working on that package. It will be open for official public comment, hopefully later this year, and will be in effect before the 2028 obligation starts. So just make sure whatever you're building is auditable, because that is an obligation you will have to undergo independent third-party audit every 3 years.
Yeah, I'm sure all the big four firms are, waiting for that to happen. But great, Liz and Gal, thank you so much. I've learned so much, and I'm more equipped to talk to my fellow CPOs and privacy leaders about their obligations and about data brokers and having that continuing conversation that I think is really important. But thank you so much for your time. And everyone, thank you here for joining us on this Drop and Delete Act webinar. Have a great day.
Thanks so
Thanks,
much.
everyone.
Bye.